God sent unclean birds to feed the prophet Elijah twice a day, without missing a single time. And in the next few minutes, you're going to understand why he did it in the strangest way in the whole Bible, how that same man survived 3.5 years without a single drop of rain, and how this story, centuries later, almost ended with Jesus dead. Because this isn't just the ravens fed Elijah, it's 3 impossible provisions, one right after the other. A bird God's own law called unclean, a foreign widow about to die of hunger with her son, and the first resurrection recorded in all of Scripture. Stay with me, because I'm going to show you the 5 turns in this story that almost nobody connects. And the last one is going to change the way you read the rest of the Bible. And before we start, let me ask you for something in good faith. If you like this channel, hit like right now. Even if this is your first video here, it doesn't take you 2 seconds, and it helps me a lot to keep telling these stories. Stay till the end, because the last part, the one about Jesus, is the one almost nobody knows. Look at where it all starts. There's a king named Ahab sitting in a palace in Samaria. He's maybe the worst king the northern kingdom of Israel has ever had. And the main reason has a name: his wife. The queen is named Jezebel, and she's a foreign princess, daughter of a king named Ethbaal, ruler of the Sidonians. Hold on to that, people, the Sidonians, because they're going to come back later and they're going to catch you off guard. Jezebel brought her god to Israel, Baal, and Baal wasn't just any god. Baal was worshipped as the lord of the storm, of the rain, and of fertility. According to the Canaanites, he was the one who opened the sky and made the earth bear fruit. Stop on that for a second, because it's the key to everything that's coming next. In a country that lives off rain to plant its crops, the god of the rain was the most important god of all. And so you understand how far things had gone. Look at what that queen was doing quietly. Jezebel didn't only bring her god, she set out to wipe the God of Israel off the map. She had the prophets of the Lord hunted down one by one, the ones who still spoke in the name of Yahweh. They'd track them in the villages, drag them out of their houses, kill them. Worshipping the true God inside Israel itself had become a crime you paid for with your life. And the situation was so bad that a man from Ahab's own palace, an official named Obadiah, who secretly feared God, had to hide 100 prophets inside 2 caves. 100 men shoved into the darkness of the rock, while he, in secret from the king and the queen, brought them bread and water so they wouldn't die. That was the climate. Israel had become a place where the whole people bowed down to an idol, and the few who stayed faithful had to hide underground to keep from being killed. Hold on to that picture, because you're going to need it. 100 prophets hiding in caves, fed in secret with bread and water, because in a few minutes you're going to see God hide one single prophet, feed him in secret too, but in a way that's going to leave those 100 behind as a small detail. And it's right there that an unknown man appears out of nowhere at the door of the palace. He comes from a lost place in the mountains on the other side of the Jordan River. He's Elijah, the Tishbite, from Tishbe in Gilead. No army, no title, no warning. And his name is already a declaration of war, because Elijah in Hebrew means, "My God is the Lord." That man walks in, looks the most powerful king in the region straight in the face, and lets one sentence drop. Elijah points at the king and tells him, "As the Lord lives before whom I stand, there will be no dew or rain in these years, except by my word." Stop everything. Did you notice what he just did? Right in the face of the couple that worships the God of the rain, this man announces a drought. It's as if he were saying, "Your Baal controls absolutely nothing." And then he turns around and disappears. Think about the courage of that scene. On one side, you've got a throne, an army, a queen who kills prophets, and a god with thousands of worshippers. On the other side, you've got a single man, no weapons, no backing, no one behind him. And that one man announces to the entire empire that the sky is going to shut, not for a day, not for a week, for years, and that the key to that sky isn't held by Baal or by the king or by the queen. It's held by the word of a God almost nobody in that country still remembers. And here you need to understand something about Ahab, because it's going to explain everything that follows. When the drought started, and the rivers began to dry up and the cattle began to die, the king didn't kneel. The king got furious, and he started hunting for the man who'd said that sentence. Scripture says Ahab sent for Elijah everywhere, that there was no nation or kingdom where he didn't send people to track him down. The most powerful king in the region put his entire empire to hunting one prophet. So when you read that God tells Elijah, hide, don't read it like a suggestion, read it for what it was. Elijah had become the most wanted man in the whole land. And the place God sent him to hide and the way he kept him alive is the first thing almost nobody understands about this story. It isn't that he was afraid to die, it's that those were the orders, because the moment he lets that sentence out, a voice speaks to him. The voice comes through clearly, and God tells him, "Get away from here, turn east, and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is across from the Jordan." And he goes on, "You'll drink from that brook, and I've already commanded the ravens to feed you there." Read it again because it's easy to miss. God didn't say, "I'm going to send an angel." God didn't say, "I'm going to multiply food from the sky the way I did with the manna." God said, "the ravens." And here comes the first turn in the story. Because the raven in Israel's law was an unclean animal. In the book of Leviticus, when God lists the birds the people couldn't even touch, the raven is on the list. Unclean, detestable, forbidden to eat, forbidden to touch when it was dead. And it's precisely that bird, that creature marked as filthy, that God picks to serve the most important prophet of that generation. Stop and feel the weight of this. The same God who wrote the rule, "Don't touch the raven," is the same God who says, "The raven is going to bring you dinner." God can use even the things religion threw in the trash. Hold on to that detail because it's going to grow. And there's an even finer irony hidden in here. The raven is a bird that by nature keeps what it finds. It's a scavenger, a hoarder, known for stealing and hiding. That bird, by instinct, should eat the food or carry it off for itself. And yet, day after day, those birds fly up to a man hiding in a ravine and drop the food without touching it. They go against their own nature. Because when God gives an order, even the instinct of an unclean animal bends to obey it. And there's a detail hidden in the language you should know about, because sooner or later, somebody's going to bring it up in the comments. The Hebrew word translated here as ravens is orevim, red orevim. And since ancient Hebrew was written without vowels, those same consonants, with the dots shifted just a little, could be read another way: Arabs, or even merchants. That's why some rabbis, just as uncomfortable maybe as you are right now with the idea of an unclean bird feeding the holiest prophet, found it cleaner to say it was actually Arab traders. Or the people of a town called Orbo who brought him the food. It sounds tidy, but it doesn't hold up. Think about it for a second. Elijah was the most wanted man in the whole land, hidden at the bottom of a ravine. Merchants finding him twice a day, without the king ever finding out. That doesn't hide a fugitive, it hands him over, and the whole tone of the story shouts miracle, not trade caravans. The reading that swaps the bird for a merchant has to rewrite the vowels of the text just to dodge the discomfort. But the text, as it stands, says ravens, unclean birds, chosen on purpose. And that tells you something huge about how God works. The religious people of that time would have expected a prophet's food to come from something pure, from a priest, from an altar, from a clean offering. But God deliberately chose the channel no holy man would have touched. It's the same signature you're going to see again and again in this whole story, and in the end, in the mouth of Jesus himself. God picks what the world threw out. He takes the dirty, the foreign, the weak, what's left over, and plants his miracle right there. So nobody can say the miracle was anyone's merit. And while you're processing that, Elijah obeys. He goes down to the brook in the middle of nowhere, and he hides. Now picture the scene. Picture a dry, narrow valley between rocks with a thread of water running at the bottom. The sun beats down hard, the air is hot and still, and the silence is total. A man alone, sitting in the shadow of a stone, waiting. And then you hear a different sound, the beating of wings. The ravens arrive, black, loud, dirty, and with food in their beaks. In the morning, they drop bread and meat near him. In the afternoon, they come back and drop bread and meat again. Every day, exactly the way God had said it. And the man who defied a king now eats from the mouths of unclean birds and drinks from a little stream. Now lift your eyes from that ravine for a moment, because you've got to see what was going on outside. While Elijah ate bread and meat twice a day, the entire land was dying of thirst. Picture fields that used to be green, now split open with cracks. Picture the wells dropping until they gave only mud. Picture the cattle falling on the roads, the rivers turned into beds of stone, and whole families rationing the last handful of grain. The famine was so brutal, it reached the palace. The king himself had to go out across the land hunting for a little grass to keep his horses from dying. You catch the contrast. The richest country, the most powerful king, couldn't even find pasture. And a fugitive hidden in a ditch had fresh meat in his hand every morning. The drought Baal couldn't stop was devouring everyone, except the man who depended on the true God. That's the first silent lesson of the story. It isn't the big place that holds you up. It's the hand that decides to feed you even from a hiding place nobody would envy. And here's a detail almost nobody knows, and it gives all of this the weight of real history. This drought didn't get recorded only in the Bible. A Phoenician historian named Menander of Ephesus, quoted centuries later by the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, left it in writing that there was a severe drought precisely during the reign of Ithobal, king of Tyre and Sidon. And you know who that Ithobal was? He was Jezebel's father, King Ahab's father-in-law, which means even the records of the queen's own people kept the memory that in those years the sky shut over the region. This isn't a pious legend. It's an event that left a mark even outside Israel, in the archives of the people who worship Baal. Notice something, none of this is comfortable. There's no table, no roof, nobody to talk to. It's pure survival, day after day, depending on a delivery that might not arrive. But it does arrive, it always arrives. And here I want to stop for a moment and talk to you, the one watching this. Maybe you're living your own Cherith right now, a tight place, hidden, far from where you wanted to be, where the provision arrives counted out at the limit with no extra. And you ask yourself, why did God bring me to such a small place? Hold on to that question, because the story doesn't answer it yet. For now, the brook runs, the ravens arrive, and Elijah lives. But there's a sentence hidden in the text that changes everything. It goes like this: after a while, the brook dried up. Did you read it? The brook dried up. And that's the second turn, because think about the logic of this. God sent Elijah to a specific place. God promised to sustain him in that place. And then the very place God chose dries up in front of him. The water disappears, the stones are left hot and bare, and the ravens have nowhere left to land and drink. God's hiding place stopped working. And this is where a lot of people get stuck in their faith, so listen carefully. Sometimes it isn't sin that dries up your brook. Sometimes it's God who's drying it up on purpose, because as long as there was water in Cherith, Elijah was never going to move. Why would he? It was working. God sometimes dries up what works to push you toward what he really planned. But put yourself in Elijah's shoes for a moment. He didn't have the next chapter in his hand the way you do right now. He only saw the water dropping. One day the brook ran strong, then it was a thread, then it was puddles, then it was dry stones and silence. Picture the question growing inside him every morning. Now what? I obeyed. I came to the exact place I was told, and the place is dying in my hands. That's one of the hardest tests of faith, and almost nobody names it. It isn't the test of when everything goes wrong all at once. It's the test of when what God Himself gave you starts to fade slowly, and heaven stays quiet while it fades. No new order, no explanation, just the dripping away of something that used to work and now doesn't. And in that silence, the only thing you've got left is to keep looking up and to trust that the same God who brought you here isn't going to leave you stranded when the source runs out. Because notice exactly when God spoke to Elijah again. It wasn't when the brook started dropping. It wasn't halfway. It was when it dried up completely. God a lot of times doesn't give the next step while you've still got a little of the previous step left to hold on to. And pay close attention, because with the brook dry, the voice speaks to Elijah again. And what God orders him now is so risky that if I told you without context, you wouldn't believe me. Stay with me, because this is the part where the story turns almost impossible. God speaks one more time and tells him, "Get up, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and stay there." And he adds, "Look, I've already commanded a widow in that place to provide for you. Now breathe, because you need to understand where Zarephath is. Remember the Sidonians. Remember Ethbaal, Jezebel's father. Zarephath was right in the middle of Sidonian territory, which means Jezebel's homeland, the home of the people of the queen who was hunting and killing the prophets of the Lord. God is sending the most wanted man in Israel into the enemy queen's backyard. Stop. Look at the size of this, because it's almost insane. Ahab has a whole empire hunting Elijah, nation by nation. And where does God send him to hide? Not to some far-off safe place. He sends him to Sidon, to the land that gave Israel the queen who wants him dead. It's like hiding the most wanted fugitive inside the house of the family that offered the bounty for his head. Any human strategist would say it's the worst possible hiding place. And it's exactly the one God chose. Because God's logic almost never is fear's logic. The place that looks the most dangerous to your eyes can be, in the hands of God, the safest. And the place that looks safe can be exactly where God knows you'd stay stuck forever. Elijah would be more protected in enemy territory, under God's care, than in any quiet cave trusting in himself. And there's even more. Sidon and Tyre were the Phoenician heart of the worship of Baal. So God sends the prophet of the drought right into the land of the God of the rain, into the land where, in theory, Baal should be stronger than ever. And there, in the very center of the cult of Baal, the drought was killing too. You caught the silent message? The God of the rain couldn't pull off rain even in his own house. And the God of Israel was about to prove it using the frailest person in that city. Not a king, not a priest, not a soldier, a widow, foreign and hungry. So you feel the size of this. Back in that time, a widow with no husband and no grown son was the most defenseless human being there was. No income, no land, no voice, no defense. And it's in that human being, the one with the least power of anyone, that God hangs the survival of his prophet. So Elijah walks, days of walking, hungry, under the same shut sky, crossing the border into enemy land. And when he finally arrives at the gate of the city, he sees a woman. And look at what God had promised him, because this makes the scene even more tense. God told him that in that city he'd already commanded a widow to provide for him. In other words, God talked like the arrangement was already made. But when Elijah arrives, thirsty, exhausted after so many miles, there's no rich woman waiting for him at the entrance with the table set. No sign, no signal from heaven, nobody saying, "I'm the one God promised you." There's only a hunched figure near the wall, gathering sticks off the ground. And that broken silhouette was the divine answer. Sometimes the provision God already prepared for you doesn't look anything like a provision when you find it for the first time. It looks fragile, it looks tired, it looks like the last place you'd go for help. Elijah had to look at the most broken person in the whole city and believe, on God's word alone, that his miracle was hidden right there. Picture that woman. Picture a thin widow, in worn clothes, bent over near the gate. She's picking up a few sticks from the ground. Just two. Her face is the face of someone who's already given up, because she's got a plan, and her plan is to die. And then this dusty stranger comes up and asks her for something simple. Elijah calls her and tells her, "Please bring me a little water in a jar to drink." She turns around to go get it, and while she's already walking, he raises the request. He tells her, "And please bring me a piece of bread in your hand too." And here the woman stops, because he's just asked her for the one thing she didn't have to give. And what she answers is one of the sharpest sentences in the whole Bible. She looks at him with a tired voice and tells him, "I swear by your God that I have no bread." And she goes on, "I've only got a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug." And she finishes, "Look, I was picking up these 2 sticks to go home, prepare it for me and my son. We eat it and then we die. Stop everything again." Did you hear what she said? She didn't say, "I'm having a rough time." She said, "This is the last meal. After that, death is coming." She and her son were going to eat the last bread and wait for hunger to take them both. And it's that woman at the bottom of the pit that God sent Elijah to ask for food. And notice something, this woman wasn't exaggerating when she said she was going to die. She was reading her reality coldly. A widow was already living on the edge in normal times. With a drought that had been killing the region for years, she was sentenced. And right at that point, the lowest point of her life, a stranger shows up and asks her for the last thing she has. But look carefully, because inside that cruel request, there's a huge question hidden. Without her knowing it, Elijah was offering her a decision. Are you going to cling to the little bit you have and die with it in your hands? Or are you going to let it go first and find out what God can do with what you let go? The whole story of this widow gets decided in that single choice. It looks like cruelty. But listen to what Elijah answers, because there's an order inside the answer. Elijah looks at her and tells her, "Don't be afraid." He tells her, "Go, do what you said, but make me a small loaf first and bring it out here to me. After that you make some for you and your son." And then he explains why she should do it. He tells her, speaking on behalf of the Lord, "The jar of flour won't go empty, and the jug of oil won't run out until the day the Lord sends rain over the land." Now think about the size of the request. A stranger from another religion is asking a mother to give him her last bread before her own son, and he's promising her something she has no way to check, that the food won't run out. That woman had every right to throw him out. But look at what's written. It says she went and did exactly as Elijah told her. She gave the first bread to the prophet. And here the miracle that sustained 3 people through the rest of the drought happens, because the flour didn't run out, the oil didn't fail. Day after day, she'd go to the jar and there was flour. She'd tip the jug and oil came down. There was never any extra. But there was never any lack either. Exactly enough every day for her son, and for the prophet. And stop on that detail because it's easy to pass over and it's precious. The miracle wasn't that one day a full granary appeared. The miracle wasn't that the jar overflowed all at once and she never had to worry again. No, the flour was enough for today. Tomorrow, the woman had to go back to the same, almost empty jar, put her hand in, and trust again, and again, and again, for months. Every morning of those years of hunger was a fresh decision to believe that one more time there'd be enough. Think about the spiritual discipline that builds. God could have given her everything at once. He chose to give her one day at a time, because a full granary would have made her forget God in a week. The jar that was refilled every morning kept her looking up every morning. The miracle wasn't only food, the miracle was a daily relationship with the God who was holding her up. And that's why, a long time later, when Jesus taught his disciples to pray, he didn't tell them to ask for the year's bread. He told them to ask for the daily bread. The widow of Zarephath was already living that prayer centuries before it existed. And here, I want to talk to you again. Maybe your jar is exactly like that today. There's never extra. The bill's close to the edge. At the end of the month, there's no reserve at all. And you feel short, like God forgot you. But look at the pattern of this woman. Her miracle wasn't becoming rich. Her miracle was that she didn't go without, one day at a time, exactly when she chose to trust before she could see. If this part touched you, write one single word in the comments. What's drying up in your brook today? It could be the job, your health, a relationship, your faith. Write it in one word and read what the others wrote, because you're not alone in this. But I've got to be honest with you about one thing. The story doesn't end at the happy ending of the flower. It turns toward the darkest side. Because after all this, the child gets sick. It says that after those days, that woman's son fell ill, and the illness kept getting worse until it reached the point where there was no breath left in him. The child died, and that's the third turn, the cruelest of them all. Think about how absurd the situation is. This woman took the prophet in. She risked her last bread on God's word. She saw the miracle of the flower happen every day in front of her eyes, and even so, her son dies. The person who did everything right takes the worst blow possible, and she does what any mother would do. She erupts at the prophet. She turns to Elijah and shouts, "What do I have to do with you, man of God?" And she goes on, with the pain coming out in the form of an accusation. "Did you come here only to remind God of my sins and kill my son?" Look at the theology hidden in her pain. Deep down, she believed God's presence had brought judgment, not blessing. That being close to the Holy One only worked to expose her sin. And here I have to stop and be honest with you about the text. The Bible doesn't explain why that child died. It doesn't say it was punishment. It doesn't say it was a test. It just tells us it happened. And there are moments when faith is exactly that, staying on your feet without the explanation in your hand. And I need this to land with you, because maybe it's the part of the story that looks the most like your life. This woman did everything right. She took the prophet in when taking him in was risky. She let go of her last bread when letting go was terrifying. She saw the miracle with her own eyes day after day. If there were a formula that said, "Obey God and nothing bad will happen to you," this woman should have been bulletproof. And yet, the cruelest blow fell on her all the same. Because that formula doesn't exist. The Bible never promised that obedience would make you immune to pain. There are faithful widows who bury their children. There are righteous men who lose everything. And anybody selling you a faith where believing in God cancels out suffering is selling you something that isn't in the text. What the story does promise is something else, deeper and harder. It doesn't promise that the pain isn't going to come. It promises that when it comes, the same God who held you up in the drought isn't going to stay quiet forever. And look at what that God was about to do in that room. But look at what Elijah does with all that pain. He doesn't argue theology with her. He just stretches out his arms and tells her, "Give me your son." And then comes one of the most intimate scenes in the whole Bible. Picture the prophet taking the body of the child from the mother's lap. Picture him climbing the narrow stairs up to the upper room where he slept with the child in his arms. Picture him laying the small body down on his own bed. And in that room, alone with a dead child, the man who defied a king does something you don't expect. He calls God to account. He cries out and says, "Lord, my God, are you going to bring trouble even on this widow who took me in by letting her son die?" Notice, not even Elijah understands. The prophet is confused too. The prophet questions too. And after pouring that out, he makes a strange gesture. It says he stretched himself out on the child 3 times, body over body, like someone trying to push his own life into that child. And each time he cries out, "Lord, my God, let this child's soul come back into him." 3 times he stretches himself out. 3 times he cries to heaven. And then the silence of the room breaks, because it says that the Lord heard Elijah's voice. The soul of the child came back into him, and he came back to life. Picture that instant. Picture the cold, still body on the bed, and the prophet kneeling next to it, not knowing whether his prayer is going to be answered or not. And suddenly, a movement. The boy's chest that lifts, just barely. A first gulp of air, rough, like someone coming back from far away. Then a color returning to the skin. Then eyelids that tremble and open. The room where death had walked in is suddenly full of breathing again. And the end of the scene is enough to make you cry. Elijah picks up the living child, goes down the stairs, and hands him back to the mother. And he tells her one sentence: "Look, your son is alive." Picture the woman, the one who was preparing her own death weeks ago, the one who lost her husband, then nearly lost her food, and then lost her son. Now she's holding him warm, breathing, alive in her arms. And what she says becomes the highest point of the whole story. She looks at Elijah and tells him, "Now I really know that you're a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is the truth." She started by swearing by his God. Like someone talking about a God that wasn't hers, she ended calling him the Lord, like someone who'd found him her own, and she didn't recognize him by a sermon, but by a son who came back from death. And now stop, because what you just saw is bigger than it looks. Elijah didn't raise that child by his own power. 3 times he cried out, 3 times he begged the Lord, and it was heaven that answered. And that was the first time in all of Scripture that anybody came back from death. Since Adam, death had never had to let anyone go. And the first crack in that wall didn't happen in a temple or in front of a crowd, but in a borrowed room, in a pagan town, for the son of a foreign woman. And if that scene sounds familiar to you, it's because you're going to see it again. Centuries later, another man would touch another dead child, and death would obey again. And in the end, that same man would walk out of a tomb himself. What happened at Zarephath was just the first tremor, hidden, of an earthquake that would one day split death in 2. The ravens, the brook, the flower, the child. It was all the same God, showing piece by piece that he sustains the one who trusts him exactly where nobody expects it. But there's still the last part, how the drought finally ended, and why this same story, centuries later, almost cost another man his life. Time goes by, the drought ends. It says that after many days, in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah again. And God told him, "Go, present yourself before Ahab, because I'm going to send rain on the land." And then comes the epic showdown on Mount Carmel, fire coming down from heaven, Baal humiliated in front of the whole people. That's a story for another day. And what a story. And hold on to the image of the end, because it closes everything. After 3.5 years of a sky of bronze, after the god of the storm was exposed as a mute idol, the prophet climbs to the top of the mountain, bows down with his face between his knees, and starts to pray for rain. He sends his servant to look at the horizon. Nothing. He sends him again. Nothing. 7 times. And on the 7th, the servant comes back and says he sees a tiny cloud the size of a man's hand rising from the sea. That tiny cloud grew until the whole sky went black, the wind blew, and finally, after so many years of death, the rain fell on the parched land. The same Lord who'd shut the sky with a single word opened it again, and never in the whole history was it Baal who let go of a single drop. But the drought itself, start to finish, lasted 3.5 years. And how do we know that number with such precision? From 2 witnesses, and the second one is going to surprise you. The first one is James. In his letter he says Elijah was a man like us, and he prayed that it wouldn't rain. And it didn't rain for 3 years and 6 months, so it wasn't the ravens for 3 years. The ravens were only the first phase at the brook, until the water dried up. The bulk of the drought Elijah spent in Zarephath with the widow. But the second witness is the most striking one. The second witness is Jesus himself. And this is where the story almost ends in a murder. Look at what happens in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus comes back to Nazareth, the town where he grew up, and walks into the synagogue. Everyone there has known him since he was a boy. He's the carpenter's son. And then Jesus, to show that the grace of God isn't an exclusive of Israel, quotes this very story. Jesus tells them, "There were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the sky was shut 3 years and 6 months, and there was a great famine over all the land." And he finishes, and this is the sharp part. But Elijah wasn't sent to any of them. He was sent only to one widow in Zarephath of Sidon, which is to say, Jesus is saying in the face of his own hometown that God passed over all the Jewish widows to bless a foreign one. And the reaction? It says that when they heard that, everyone in the synagogue was filled with rage. They got up, drove Jesus out of the town, and took him to the top of a hill to throw him off it. And you've got to understand why that sentence enraged them so much, because it touches something that's still alive today. The ones in that synagogue believed they were the owners of God. They were the chosen people, the children of Abraham, the ones who had the law, the temple, and the promises. And suddenly the carpenter's son reminds them that in Elijah's time there were dozens of Jewish widows dying of hunger, and God wasn't sent to any of them. God crossed the border, walked into enemy territory, and poured his miracle out on a pagan woman from Sidon. What Jesus was telling them with no roundabout was this: you don't have God in your pocket. The grace of God isn't inherited by family name and isn't bought with religion. God is free to bless whoever he wants, even the ones you despise, even the outsiders. And that, for a heart that believes itself the owner of God, is the most unbearable thing in the world, so unbearable that they preferred trying to kill the messenger to accepting the message. So look at the road we walked. God used unclean birds, what religion called dirty, to feed his prophet. God dried up the very hiding place he'd given to push Elijah toward the bigger plan. God sent the most wanted man to the land of the enemy queen. In the center of the worship of the rival god, God hung the survival of everyone on the frailest woman in that city. God did the first resurrection in the Bible in a hidden room for a child nobody knew. And centuries later, Jesus took this same story and used it like a bomb against the religion that thought it had God in its hand. And notice something that ties this whole story into one single knot. Look at the three who stood against this God, because at heart they're the same sin with 3 masks. Jezebel wanted to be the owner of God by erasing him by force, killing his prophets. Baal proclaimed himself the owner of the sky and of the rain, and couldn't let go of a single drop. And the synagogue in Nazareth believed itself the owner of God because it carried Abraham's blood. 3 different ways of wanting to possess God, and all 3, one after the other, were left looking ridiculous because nobody owns God. God gives himself to the one who trusts in him, even if that someone is an unclean bird, a foreign widow, or a child who was already dead. And let me ask you something direct, because this whole story turns on a single decision. What's your last bread right now? What's the thing you're holding on to with both hands? That little bit you're afraid to let go of because you think it's the only thing you've got left. Maybe it's some money, maybe it's a plan, a control, a grudge, a dream you don't want to hand over. The widow found out that what she let go of in obedience was exactly what the Lord multiplied. And what would have rotted in her hands, in the hands of God, fed a whole household for years. And come back for a moment to the beginning of it all, to the name of that man, Elijah means, my God is the Lord, not Baal, not the king, not the queen with her army of false prophets. My God is the Lord. And the whole story you just heard was nothing but that name turned into a life. When the brook ran, my God is the Lord. When the brook dried up, my God was still the Lord. When the flower barely stretched, when the child died, when the child came back, when the rain finally fell, my God is the Lord. That man wasn't carrying a name. He was carrying a flag planted in the center of the worst crisis of his nation. And that same flag is the one being offered to you today. Not the promise that you're never going to go through a Cherith. Not the promise that your brook is never going to dry up, but something much stronger, that whatever happens with the brook, the owner of the sky is still your God. And as long as that's true, neither the drought nor the hunger nor the grave has the last word over your life. So before you go, look back one last time. Maybe your own ravens were people you never expected. Maybe your Zarephath was the place that looked like the end and turned out to be the beginning. And maybe your greatest resurrection is still ahead. And don't close this video yet. Right there on the screen, I left you the next one. And it connects directly with what you just felt today. I made it for the ones who made it this far, for people like you, the ones who really want to see what almost nobody dares to look at. Click now and we keep going.